Okay. Welcome everybody to the second of our fall Black Lives Matter speaker series. This series is sponsored by the College of Letters and Arts and Social Science, by the Africana Studies Program, by the Office of Multicultural Affairs, and the Diversity and Justice Certification Program. We're glad you've joined us. We have a very special guest tonight. I am co-director of the Africana Studies, and I'm going to turn the introduction duties over to my other co-director, Dr. Barry Bilderback.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson, and Dr. Tichavakunda. Welcome. And welcome to the University of Idaho, everybody. Dr. Tichavakunda comes to us from the University of Cincinnati as a professor of education leadership, and he is very prolific in publications, and areas of interest include public sector, higher education, race and equity, and the interlinks and exchanges in all of them. And it's an honor to have you here tonight. And welcome again from Ohio. If you look at his biography, he's also quite humorous in that effect. And I share your affinity, not just at the professional level with your topics, but also the fact that you work out and you avoid leg day, if anybody. Yeah. All right, man. Well, welcome, and it's great to have you here. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, and I guess would I just get started? Is that cool? Or
yeah, I'll just take 1 second to encourage people to send in questions and comments. Dr. Sydney Freeman is going to moderate the Q&A after Dr. Tichavakunda finishes. So we definitely want to have some exchange and interaction and conversation. So please do send in your questions and comments. Thank you.
And question is the chat available for everyone? Like if someone says something, would I be able to see it in the chat or no? Just out of curiosity.
Yes, I turned that feature on. Although I thought I had turned on you.
All good.
Well, we'll see. It should be.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll be asking some questions. So if you're by a computer, I'll need audience participation. If I'm not getting any, I'm just going to assume that technical difficulties. No worry, I'll keep it moving. Okay, awesome, Jason, appreciate it. Okay, so I'll share my screen if that's okay. You think I'd be proficient at this by this time, but
see, now you're just making me feel better about sending you to the wrong side.
Look, we're gonna make it through. Hold on. All right. So can everyone see that? Hopefully. Cool. I see some heads nodding on my side. So thank you, Jason, holding me down. Appreciate it. So I'll start my timer. I'm gonna try to do less than thanks, Ms. Purcell. Less than 40 minutes to make sure there's time for Q&A. But yeah, let's just get right into it. Number one, I want to thank the University of Idaho. Thank you so much for letting me come share my work with you all. Thank you to the Africana Studies Department. Thank you for Jan Johnson, Barry Bilderback. I appreciate you all extending this opportunity to think with you all. And a special thanks to Sydney Freeman. I appreciate you sharing my work with the department. And if you all haven't read it already, Dr. Freeman has an excellent piece on thriving in liminality, and it's all about like department chairs, faculty chairs. So if you've seen the Netflix series like I have, I highly recommend you watch it. And Sydney Freeman, Dr. Freeman, I don't know if you've written a op-ed about it already. I hope you do, because it's important work. So yeah, thank you all for sharing space with me. I appreciate it. So my name is Antar A Tichavakunda, and the title of this is The Tensions of Centering Black Life and Black Joy in Education. If you know anything about me, I'm very, I struggle with PowerPoint, so be very proud of me, different fonts, all that, right? You can follow me on Twitter at my handle right there. It's just my last name. Or if you want to follow up later, you can just shoot me an email. So let's get into it. So who am I? Why did they ask me here? Ask me to come here, right? I wouldn't say I'm prolific just yet, but I do have a real interest in Black student life, right? I attended a predominantly white institution myself for undergrad, grads, and grad school for my master's and PhD. I'm a product of DC public schools. And I mentioned that because it really shaped my interest and passion in education, kind of like witnessing a lot of inequalities, in addition to witnessing, just kind of the collective agency of teachers, staff, fellow peers to traverse these systems, right? So that really got me interested in education, and that's what led me to this field. I taught for a couple years in DC, same system that I graduated from as a teacher. So you can only imagine how that was for me on the other end. I regretted giving the substitute teacher such a hard time because I felt like I received that tenfold as a teacher. But yeah, like I said, that really informs a lot of my work. Being from DC, being a product of DC public schools, and also attending like predominantly white institutions or PWIs, which I'll refer to throughout this work. And my research agenda right now largely looks at like the sociology of higher education and race, but I'm really interested in one particular aspect of that, and that's as you can see right here on this screen. How can we better support Black students and communities in a society where racism is permanent? How can we better support Black students and communities in a society where racism is permanent? So I've been wrestling with this question, right? And with that, a lot of, agency comes to mind, life comes to mind. What does life look like in a society where racism is permanent? So this is kind of like my central research question right now, and that's what has led me to some of this work. I'd be remiss if I didn't say this. Again, my interest in this, I have a book coming out in November called Black Campus Life: The Worlds Black Students Make at a Historically White Institution. So again, that work has also informed what I'm doing now about Black joy, Black life. And this will be, one of the few ethnographies of higher education, and potentially like the only, book length ethnography about Black student life, and in higher education as well. So check it out if you're interested. Hopefully I don't bore you in this talk. So this will give you some type of teasers and, ideas of insight into how I think and approach education and educational research. So why talk about Black joy or Black life in such an anti-Black grief-stricken time, right? I wrestle with this question all the time I want to apologize right now because I said I was going to be talking about Black joy, and I have a couple papers that I wrote about that, but I actually want to share with you all something completely new. So I hope you all can appreciate that and, give me grace in this. This is a completely new paper I've never presented on, so you'll be the first to hear about it unless you're one of the peer reviewers for the journal that I've submitted this paper to. But I really wrestled with this question. Why am I talking about Black life right now at this moment, right? Why am I talking about Black joy and Black life when we're seeing, like on CNN, on MSNBC, pictures of Black people, Haitian immigrants, running away, potentially getting whipped by border agents, right? Why would I talk about Black joy, Black life at a time, in the wake of the summer of 2020, right? When we had this onslaught of such highly visible Black violence, or like, just in our face, right? Why would I talk about Black joy, Black life when we still have professors who are not Black using the N-word all the time? What's joyous about that? We have more important problems, right? So I really wrestle with this question. Why would I talk about this when there's so much going wrong, when it comes to race relations? Why talk about Black life in a world that's so profoundly anti-Black, right? And I actually wrote this paper with the thing I'm presenting on. I wrote this during the summer 2020, from protesting to coming back home and writing, right? So it was this weird kind of tension I had. And I realized it's a tension trying to write about Black life right now, especially, right? When we have so many other instances, so many other examples in the media that's showing us that Black life doesn't matter, right? How do I write about Black life in a moment where we have a movement that's hinged upon such a desperate plea, Black life matters, right? But I would flip that, right? In thinking about this, I would flip that and say, how can we not write about Black life at this moment, right? It's even more important that we write about Black life, Black joy, when the world, police, institutions, etc., are saying Black life doesn't matter. So that's why I feel like it's important for me to engage in this work. There's this stupendous quote by Zora Neale Hurston. If you've seen any other presentations, I always include this quote. I saw it first in Marcus Hunter and colleagues' work about Black placemaking. So I want to, give credit where credit is due. But this quote is from Art and Such, essay by Zora Neale Hurston, the essayist and writer. Negroes love and hate and fight and play and strive and travel and have 1,001 interests in life like other humans. When his baby cuts a new tooth, he brags as shamelessly as anyone else without once weeping over the prospect of some Klansman knocking it out if and when the child ever gets grown. And the authors of that sociological piece, Black Placemaking, say that much of social science research focuses on the Klansman knocking the baby's tooth out, right? And they put forth this idea or concept of Black placemaking and say, hey, let's focus on the life. Let's focus on this new life, this new baby being born, right? So they're trying to redirect the slant of social science research. And I think that I'm, part of a chorus of scholars who are trying to do this work that acknowledges like the permanence of racism, right? That figurative and literal Klansmen, but also acknowledges the agency in life that happens either because or in spite of such anti-Blackness, right? So again, when I was first started doing this work about Black joy, Black life, I wanted to make sure I did it the right way, right? So I wanted to see how other people, other scholars, across race were talking about feeling good or experiencing joy or agency in otherwise subjugated conditions. So I just read everything I could that was semi-related to it. So I actually found a lot of inspiration in Emily West's work, Chains of Love, Slave Couples in Antebellum, South Carolina. How often do you think of, families, romantic relationships during the times of chattel slavery, right? And it's this interesting interplay with obviously structure and agency. So, I found inspiration in work like that. I found inspiration in Robin D.G. Kelly's Race Rebels. I found inspiration in Race, Riots, and Roller Coasters, where Wolcott actually looks at recreation for, recreation and how recreation was segregated, right? And how recreation, especially for Black folks, were policed, right? So I want to just mention, like, I was really trying to do this work. There's this incredible book by Saidiya Hartman, Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments, that also talks about agency and breathes life into people who weren't seen as important or less than. And lastly, which I find so much inspiration from, Kevin Quashi's work, The Sovereignty of Quiet, really transformed the way I thought about research, Black student life, how we think about and construct Black people in our research. So I definitely want to make thank Quashi and all the scholars before me and right now who are doing similar work. So, quick question, if you're by a computer, type, help me out. What comes to mind when you think of Ruby Bridges? What comes to mind when you think of Ruby Bridges? Schools, New Orleans. What comes to mind? How young she is. Still alive, right? What comes to mind? Some of you are like, look, this is a webinar. I'm not trying to write anything. That's cool. Strength. Yes, exactly. What else? Anything else? Education. Totally. Symbol. Awesome. That's thank you, Yvonne Hood. That's really what I was looking for, right? All these things come to mind. All these things are right? Norman Rockwell, what the problem we all live with, that famous painting. So I just figured I snatched this photo, and I immediately, when I think of Ruby Bridges, I immediately think of that picture. I think about her flanked by three white folks who are, I don't know if they're in the Navy, security guard, whatever, but I think of that strength. I think about, it's like an emblem of resistance, right? And I think about how on Twitter, social media, folks are often like, Ruby Bridges is still alive. She's like, that's how close civil rights was, right? This wasn't far away. And I think about that. I think I'm asking you to think about how you typically think about her right? Because how often do you think about, again, someone said how young she was. What did Ruby Bridges like to do when she was also integrating this school, right? How often do we think about the fact that she enjoyed, she enjoyed playing softball in the street, right? She enjoyed peach cobbler, right? She enjoyed playing with her friends. She was a whole, child during this moment. And I think her resistance seems even that much more powerful when we contextualize her, when we center her as a human, as a person, as a Black girl, right? Knowing that she was so much more than that emblem of resistance. Totally, she was resistant, but she was more than that. And I think that's really what I'm trying to get at in this paper, in this presentation, right? If we only understand Ruby Bridges as a symbol of resistance, then we are truncating who she is. We are making, we are making her, we are flattening her in a sense, right? And I don't think that's with malintent, but I just want to point that out. Mind you, this whole, and I also want to say, like, I got this whole idea of thinking about a symbol from Kevin Quashue's work, The Sovereignty of Quiet, and he just really makes us think about these symbols of resistance in a different way. So I do want to acknowledge that as well. All right, second question. What do we know about Black student life at predominantly white universities? What do we know about this? Feel free to type it in the chat. I'll just give it a few seconds. When you think about Black student life at PWIs, what comes to mind? Token. Depending on the university, be isolating. Yeah. Solitary. Oh, communal. Okay. So again, just think about that, right? What comes to mind when you think about research, when you think about depictions of Black student life at PWIs? What comes to mind? There's this very popular and useful book called The Agony of Education, right? And when I was a little doctoral student thinking about my research, this book popped up, heavily cited, right? And in this piece, it was very foundational, because it's like, hey, we're saying like Black students' lives in these PWIs are vastly different than their counterparts. We can't just assume that a PWI works for Black students like it does for white students, right? So this book is so useful in that way, right? And in so many words, they demonstrate how being Black at a PWI is agonizing, right? And we know this to be true in research, and all this research is super important. We know about microaggressions. I can't tell you how many times back at, when I was in college, people asked me if I played football or basketball. I can't tell you how much it hurt to, see people that I worked in groups with, and, in the library, but they wouldn't talk to me outside of class, like non-Black folks. I mean, I can tell you all about these experiences, that were racist, for lack of better words. And so much research outlines this. However, I went to Brown undergrad. If you ask me about generally, how was Brown? I'm not going to tell you about the agony of education, right? I'm going to tell you about the life that me, my friends made, either because or in spite of that racial climate and the state of race relations. I'm going to tell you about my team, my basketball team, my intramural basketball team, Pain Revisited, right? How we won the championship and folks didn't think we were going to win it. I'm going to tell you about the fraternity that I joined, the Monster Alpha Gamma chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. I'm going to tell you about the time that I lived in the Black residential hall, right? Which you can see here, the Harambe House at Brown University. I'll tell you about this epic freestyle battle that happened this night. Like, you're seeing it right there. That's me and my BlackBerry right there, talking about how wild the freestyle battle was, right? I'll tell you about the joy and the life that we made in spite of race relations and everything else that was going on, right? But we can only see that if we're centering Black life, if we're beginning from that point. So again, a little bit more about my research and how I've been trying to engage with Black life. Obviously, I mean, I told you about my book. It came from my dissertation, Black Campus Life. I've researched in different areas, but I just want to focus on this. I did research, put forth the theoretical paper, Black Placemaking in Higher Education. So I don't know if you remember that, what I said about Marcus Hunter and colleagues. I tried to show how that would look in the higher education setting, right? So I've been thinking about life in that way. And also, while here at UC, I did an empirical project where I was like, okay, what would research look like if I tried to center Black life in Black communities, right? Based off of that, I wrote a couple papers about Black joy And I have this conceptual essay, which I'm sharing with you all, never before heard, never before seen, outside the reviewers, about centering Black life. So that's what brings me to this moment, to this research, so you get, a little more about idea about who I am as a scholar. So the actual empirical project I was talking about, right? I studied, over 20 Black students, undergraduates at this predominantly white undergraduate institution. I'll call it Big University for a pseudonym. And at this university, only 6% of the population is Black, undergraduate population, but it's within a city that's over 35% Black, right? So you can see kind of like just the contrast when you juxtapose it. And like I said, from this main project, I have these couple pieces about joy, but what I'm going to talk to you about now is just from 3 students, right? And these 3 students all happen to be first generation college students, and they all happen to, all these students are Black as well. So I want you to keep that in mind, right? The people that I'm about to highlight, all first generation students, all Black students at this PWI that students commonly say is segregated, doesn't have the best racial climate. So keep that in mind as we get to, the findings. So again, we talked about this, and we won't have to ask a question here, but I want you to think just in the back of your mind, what comes to mind when I said that, right? Black, first generation college student, PWI. Just think about it. You don't have to type in the chat if you want to, by all means. But just think about it. Okay, you're a researcher, you're a social scientist. How am I going to study this, right? Just think about that. Because for me, a lot of things come to mind. You may talk about struggle, you may talk about, lack of a sense of belonging, imposter syndrome. A host of ideas and research directions come to mind. And I include this in another paper, but this quote from a student, it was jarring for me, but it also let me know that I felt like I was doing the right, in the right direction of my research agenda. Because at the end of the interview, I, turned off the recorder, we're done. I thank her for her time. That's typical qualitative research, right? Thank you so much for your time. Because I'm just giving them like a $10, $15 gift card, right? So I just thank her for her time. Like, thank you so much for, sharing your words with me. I really appreciate it. And she stopped me and she said, no, thank you. And I'm like, look, I didn't give y'all much, like, stop, and she's like, no, seriously, thank you. And she said, because people only want to talk to Black students when something bad happens. People only want to talk to Black students when something bad happens, right? And this is not at all to say like, oh, this other work is less than, right? So many, like I said, we're in anti-Black times. We need to understand anti-Blackness in all its manifestations. But we also need to understand that anti-Blackness is not the totality of Black life or Black student life. And I think this quote kind of encapsulates that in some way. So, like I said, I recognize it's a tension. It's a tension to center Black life in social sciences and also education research in particular. When we're thinking of, we're very applied research. Like, how can we get more students to graduate? How can we get more Black students to feel like they belong? We're interested in answers. We're interested in outcomes. So what do I look like coming in here talking about some fluffy stuff like joy and, Black life? Like, no. We need people to graduate, and I get that. So it's a tension, right? Like, that's something I struggled with and I continue to struggle with. Like, where is the role of centering Black life or talking about Black student life or the ordinariness of Black student life in such an applied discipline? Or you think about, W.E.B. Du Bois's words, right? Like, how does it feel to be a problem? That's in so many ways directed this arc of research on, Blackness, on race relations, on Black life. And structurally, I would suggest we're still, structurally, we are problems, right? Kevin Quashie has this amazing quote where he says, like, Black people are resistant in context, but not in essence, right? So I think similarly, we can say we may be problems, Black people may be problems in context, but not in essence, right? So I think in this work that I'm trying to do, I'm trying to open up how we think about what research is valuable to understand Black students and Black student life. So I completely agree that for many folks, and you have a lot of Afro-pessimists, folks who are doing Black crit, who was just informed by, theories of anti-Blackness and Afro-pessimism, who are saying that schooling is a site of anti-Black suffering, right? And one of the kind of foundational thinkers of Black Crit, Michael Dumas and Kiana Ross, in their piece, they say that, there is no way that Black people have not lost something living in, this society, of anti-Blackness. And I would add an addendum to that. And I would say, but there's also no way that Black people have not also lived, right? I think so often we talk about the loss, but there's also the living that happens during that loss, or in that structural position of loss. So again, like I said, these are more tensions than anything that I'm going to talk about. But getting into it, I only want to talk about 3 students, right? So when I wrote this paper, I was very much like, who am I to write a paper about, just 3 quotes? Like, that's some wild stuff, right? I'm a junior scholar. I can't do this. But there was something about these quotes from these 3 first-generation college students, 3, Black first-generation college students. There's something about their quotes and their words and who they were that felt important for me. It felt interesting. It felt sociologically important. It felt like I had to, it felt like I had to, there was something more there, but I didn't have the theories to talk about it. And I was like, why is it so difficult for me to include this information, right? The data wouldn't quite fit in the other papers I had. So I was like, why is it so difficult for me to place this data? So in this paper, I'm kind of wrestling with that. So I offer 3 questions that scholars, I think, should grapple with regardless of what type of framework you're using or what type of approach you use. I offer these 3 questions as kind of points of departure to think about your work and to the extent that you're centering Black life. 1, can Black student life be quiet? 2, are we using time-saving inventions to simplify Black student life? 3, are Black students tragically colored? So I found inspiration in these questions, both from these students' words, but also from literary theorists and essayists and writers in general. So you'll see more of that in a second. So this is a quote from Ashley, right? And I thought this was supremely important, but it didn't fit into the other papers that I was writing. But it just seemed like, wow, I need to write about this. I need to say something about this. So I'll take a second to kind of read some of this. She says, I like to paint. She describes painting as a de-stressor and paints nearly every weekend. In elementary school, her parents would buy her art supplies for her birthday or other holidays. She said, recently, I don't know why, but I just ordered some little canvases. And then I just started painting and hanging them up in my dorm. It kind of just popped in my head, whatever I have around or I'm feeling. And it depends on the colors I use and stuff like that. I asked her more questions. I was like, oh, is this for a class? And she said, no, just something I want to do, And I was like, are you interested in selling any of this? Like, is it like that? She's like, nah, this is just very, very, Ashley was very soft-spoken. It was if I'm thinking about like as an interviewer, it was a tough interview for me to have. So I was like, oh, give me more data, tell me more. But she was, very soft-spoken. But so she kind of just left it at that, like, no, I'm not selling it. This is just for me. And, I want you to just think about, what do we make of this? What do we make of this? Why is this something that I would want to include for this? Mind you, she's first generation Black college student, woman. Also worth noting, she identifies low income as well. But what do we make of this? Why am I talking about this, right? And in understanding this, I think about Kevin Quashi's concept of quiet, right? So think about that question I asked: can Black student life be quiet? So Quashi says that quiet is the answer to the question Quashi wrestles with himself. Beyond resistance, what informs Black culture, right? So if I want to understand her Ashley's painting, what would happen if I understand it as resistant, right? Wasn't necessarily activist art, Was she necessarily painting just because maybe she was pushed out of like a study group, right? Because maybe she's the only Black person in her class, right? And she was painting as a de-stressor. I'm not sure about that. But if we only understand her as resistant, right? If we only understand her as someone who is Black and therefore resistant or pushed out, then we can only understand her painting in relation to that, right? So quiet, I think, offers more room to understand just like the interiority of who Ashley is, the humanness, the ordinariness of who Ashley is, right? And I think that provides us with more flexibility of thinking about who she is as a person as well, right? She does, all of her work doesn't necessarily have to be tied to some other outcome, which I think is the impulse of a lot of social science and education research. So the next thing, and I just had to, I had to, include this quote. I actually just texted, this picture to the student. And this student, his name for the purpose of this will be Jeffrey. And Jeffrey is he's an activist. Okay, he is an activist. He leads all these organizations. I don't know he has time for anything. Leader of like the Black Student Union, everything, and just a very busy person. And he told me, I don't know how it came up. We started talking. I asked him, probably like, what does he do for fun? And he says, I took a swimming class last semester. I don't know how to swim. I'm learning how to swim. Still after that swim class, it was the first time he had to let go in a sense, because you'll drown if you're, tense. So it's been training him to let go. And he said this other quote, which I just thought was, beautiful. He said, I've been in China and in Paris, but this one place in my hometown that's like considered to be trash compared to the places I've been. He's from Cleveland. He said, but that's just like my favorite place on earth. It's this little rock path. It stops halfway in the water and it's just Lake Erie. Lake Erie is dirty, but it looks so cool when the sun is set. It just looks beautiful. It's low key like a symbolic piece. I actually want to go swimming when I'm too stressed out, or I just swim, or I just try to swim. So what do we make of this, right? How do we understand this? What is a social scientist when they hear something like this? What do they do? Do they throw it out and discard this? I can't use it for my study, right? Or do we understand it as like, okay, maybe he's tense because he has racial battle fatigue and he's stressed out all the time because of race relations on campus. That might be true. Or maybe someone who's more of a historian will look at this and be like, I wonder why he can't swim. It's probably because of historical discrimination against Black folks and their limited access to swimming pools, right? That would be true too. Or an environmentalist might look at this and be like, hey, I want to talk about why Lake Erie is dirty, and let's talk about the environmental racism and how that affects this student. All these approaches could be true, right? But I think it may not, we may be kind of precluding what the finding would be if we approach it in that manner, right? So I found inspiration in James Baldwin's Everybody's Protest novel, that essay about Richard Wright's work, Native Son. And when he's talking about a protest novel, Baldwin says, through devotion to a cause, protest writers flatten a character's humanity and lop this creature down to a status of a time-saving invention. Referring to the generic Black character in a protest novel, Baldwin says, he is not, after all, merely a member of society or a group or a deplorable conundrum explained by science. He is something more than that, something resolutely indefinable, unpredictable. In overlooking, denying, and evading its complexity, we are diminished and we perish, right? So I want you to take a second and think about all the ways we kind of use time-saving inventions and potentially lop down our participants. Some of that's necessary, right? We can't write, unless we're doing like a life history, right? We can't write tomes about all of our participants, right? We are social scientists at the end of the day, but I do think it's a tension that we have to grapple with. How often do we use these ideal types, right? We think about, first generation students, something comes to mind. You think about Anthony Jack's super important work, privileged poor, doubly disadvantaged, right? You think about, Ann Arnett Ferguson's work, about Black boys, right? And kind of like, troublemakers, so we think about how do we kind of lop people down, right? You think about Paul Willis's work in Lads, right? How do we make this categorize them? And that's what we do as social scientists. But in that process, how are we potentially dehumanizing or flattening them, right? Because like I mentioned, Jeffrey, we could come up with a whole story for him just from me telling you that he's a Black student leader and an activist. But if we begin with that kind of like archetype, then we may miss this softer, ordinary, just ordinarily beautiful part of him, right? Who just wants to take in a quiet moment in Lake Erie. Maybe he just appreciates how the evening sky reflects off of the water, right? Maybe he likes the way the sound of the water kissing the rocks, right? Like maybe that's just it, So think about how he's maybe resistant in context, right? An activist in context, but not in essence. And so the last person, Ariel is, again, another Black student leader. Throughout her interview with me, she gave me the most information about the state of race relations, the poor state of race relations on campus, and she could go down a list about how this school was racist and messed up and anti-Black. Um, and I asked her, because she seemed, when I asked her earlier how she liked the school, and she's like, "Oh, I like it. It's been a good time." How? Like, you just talk about all this racism, and she pointed to her friend group. And she said something I remember was there was, one of our day football games. So we started to tailgate early, and afterwards we were just chilling, and my friends started trying to freestyle, and they were really not that good. But somebody said something that was kind of fire, and we still talk about it to this day. We're like, "Oh, remember those two lines we had that were really funny?" Little things like that are just funny. So what do we make of that? Like, does that make the final cut for our essays or our research? And why am I including that? How do we understand this? And we might say, "Oh, this is, her and her friend group, it's a counter space. It's a place of refuge, and that's where she finds a sense of belonging, right?" And I wanted to think about that piece of data with Zora Neale Hurston's essay, how it feels to be colored to me. Incredible essay. And she says she does not always feel colored. "I feel most colored when I'm thrown against a sharp white background." She explains that she's not tragically colored and does not belong to the sobbing school of Negrohood who hold that nature somehow has given them a low down, dirty deal. Zora says that she does not weep at the world, but because, as she put it, she's too busy sharpening her oyster knife, too busy living life. And just, it's more of a meditation for me and a critique of a lot of Black social science research, right? And the limits of social science research as well. And you think about what questions are worth asking in relation to these questions that I'm posing, right? So, for example, like, I'm thinking about Beverly Tatum's foundational work. Why are all the Black kids sitting together, at the lunch table? If you're thinking about this question, right, are Black students always, like, tragically colored? If you think about centering Black life, you're less interested in why, Black students are sitting together. You're curious about, hey, what's going on at that table? Like, who's roasting who? Is someone freestyling? Like, who are the friend groups? How's this going? How's this a place of sustenance for these Black students? This is where you find, the sociologically interesting, life-giving, I think, data, right? So in grappling with these questions, certain questions become less important, right? That's not to say that Tatum's work is anything less, right? I think it's foundational, but there's more to that work that we see when we're centering Black life and Black joy. So this kind of summation, right, actually could be narrowed down to a Black woman from low-income neighborhood navigating higher education. Jeffrey could be boxed into the identity of a Black man, activist, and a student leader in multiple organizations. Ariel might be flattened into the category of a Black woman leading a Black student organization. All these things are true, but they're sorely incomplete. And I suggest that the questions that I offer can help us reorient us to make sure that, we're taking account of and engaging with the complex humanity of the people we study. So again, I'll just offer these questions again. 1, can Black student life be quiet? 2, are we using time-saving inventions to simplify Black student life? 3, are Black students tragically colored? I want people to ask these questions as they're doing research, right? And again, it's not like a surefire way to make sure we're centering Black life. It's attention. But I think in grappling with this, we can do a better job of honoring and centering Black life. I'm running low on time, so I want to kind of rush through this. But I want to say there scholars, of course, I'm not the only person doing this. I find inspiration from a lot of other folks who are doing similar work, maybe not using the same words, but doing similar work of centering Black life and pushing us to think about how we're centering Black life. So here are, a few books that I thought, nowhere near exhaustive, that I think are useful in thinking about how we center Black life and pushing us to think about that. So kind of like the so what, I think centering Black life can inform our theory of change. By that, I mean theories of change. I took this from Eve Tuck's work. And theories of change undergird all social science research. It has implications for how a project unfolds, what projects are worth doing, what questions we ask, who is the us, who is the audience. I'm reading from her work right now. Who we think, how we think things are known, and how others can or need to be convinced. So a theory of change helps to operationalize the ethical stance of a project, right? So again, that's Eve Tuck's work right there that I'm using. But I think in asking these questions, we can inform or shape our theory of change. I think these questions are points of departure for us as we're analyzing data or coming up with projects. And I think, another thing I want to make sure that I say is that centering anti-Black racism and suffering and centering Black life is not an either or, but a both and. It's not like, this group is bad, we shouldn't be talking about that. No, Black life is expansive, so we need an expansive repertoire of theories and approaches to understand it, and acknowledge it and engage it. So lastly, I'll kind of just ask this question that Cynthia Dillard posed. How do Black lives matter to our work? And how would Black people see that they matter in our work, right? Does Black life only matter when it's being buffeted by anti-Blackness, right? To what extent does Black life matter when it's do Black lives matter if it's just Black people having fun, partying, right? Coming together to play on a basketball, coming up with a basketball tournament or something, right? Doing freestyle battles, what have you. Coming together, on the campus green just to talk and listen to music, right? Does Black life matter if it's ordinary? Does Black life matter if it's joyous? So that's, I think this question just really does a good job of encapsulating, just our work on Black students and Black student life in general. So thank you all so much. If you have any questions you would like to follow up with, this is my Twitter and there's my email, and I will stop sharing. I appreciate everyone coming out.
Thank you so much, Doc, for your wonderful presentation. I think this was extremely informative to our community. What we'll do is the question and answer item there is open. So feel free, the audience, feel free to put some questions in there. I have plenty of questions. So if we don't get any questions in there, I have plenty of questions for our guests. So the first thing I was thinking about and what really pushed me is your comments on kind of the flattening of Blackness, right? And so when I was listening to that, I thought about how there are various ethnicities within what we call Black people or African Americans, right? And so could you talk about maybe the way in which joy may be displayed by different groups within Black people? Because a lot of times we just say Black, and what we've learned is that there are different subgroups within the larger diaspora.
Awesome. Great question. I appreciate it. And that's something I'm thinking about. And I think there isn't nearly enough work about it. I think some folks are doing it. But again, you think about a time-saving invention, right? How do we just say, oh, Black students, right? I do that. I often say, oh, this is a limitation. I'm not talking about ethnic differences within it, right? But I think that's why we say there should be more work as opposed to less. And I'm thinking about one student in particular from my most recent study, who's from West Africa, and he was kind of critiquing the African Student Association. He was like, this isn't, the songs y'all are playing are old. This isn't real. This isn't authentic. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. Like, second generation West African versus, someone who's coming, who's immigrated right, from there. And just kind of like, that kind of slight tension there. So you think about even the intragroup differences and dynamics within the African Student Association, right? We're such a diverse people within this identity of Blackness. So I think, it's a call for more research. It's a call for more nuance as well. And I think there should only be more, because when we say, oh yeah, the Black students enjoy this is Black joy, that's even problematic to an extent, because not all Black people may like this type of party, or X type of party. Maybe the Black Student Union kind of is more more responsive to students who identify as slave, American slave descendants of slaves. And African Student Association is more like catch-all, Caribbean, West African, et cetera. But I think we need more of this work is what I'm saying. And I think that's another way for me and others to think about, okay, yeah, me just saying Black is a time-saving invention, but one piece can't do everything. So I hope I engaged your question. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. We have 3 questions, so they really want to engage you. So I want to slip this in before we go to those. There's this book. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's the Joy of Thriving While Black, Sharice M. Williams. So this may be one that you want to add to your library if you're not.
Yeah, thanks for letting me know. I'll definitely add that. Thank you.
It just came out maybe about 4 months ago, so wanted to put that on your radar.
I appreciate it.
So we'll start with Barry's question. Are there possible distinctions to be made between Black student life in PWIs in metropolitan and rural areas, or are the challenges the same? If so, would strategies and language to combat racism need to shift to be effective?
Yeah, I think so, right? And again, like I said, like just pushing us to think past time-saving inventions, right? If you think about Black student life at PWIs, what do we automatically think? Or for me, what's my epistemological impulse? I'm automatically thinking, okay, PWI, 4-year institution, residential campus. I'm not sure if it's urban or not, but that's what I'm thinking, right? What about the commuter students, right? What about the more rural areas, right? I can't pronounce that. But I'm thinking, if I'm centering joy, if I'm centering recreation, I think, and that's one of the things I try to make clear in that paper that I wrote, and I encourage y'all to read, but I didn't want to rehash it here. But we can learn more about racism through joy, right? So where do Black students in a rural campus, where do they go for fun, right? Do they have any institution sanctioned space for themselves, right? Is there any space outside of campus that are, that they may feel welcome to? Because it's one thing, like I know here at UC, a lot of Black students tend to go to, they have like different spots. Like there's a restaurant that's very friendly to Black students, right? So a lot of them see that as a Black place of congregation there. So they're not even getting that from campus, right? So I think, we can see through where Black students, congregate, have fun, party, that type of thing. We can learn more about racist structures, and to the extent that like rurality, urbanicity shapes that. But I think again, of course, it's contextual. But I think we can learn more about Black student life and belonging by way of, okay, what are Black students doing right now to come together, to have fun, to feel like they belong? Where do they go? Is there any place on campus where they can go, right? Or do they all have to go off campus? Do they have to go to other campuses to feel like they belong, right? Or do they have like a very super well-run Black cultural center, right? But I think we can learn about these kind of institutional aspects of racism through joy and centering Black life. So I hope that engages with your question.
I want to piggyback on that because we're in the midst of reestablishing our Black Cultural Center. Could you just briefly speak to maybe the importance of having a space dedicated to Black students and Black people on campus?
Oh, for sure. I mean, that's like, one of the things I just did like a little bit of work of like campus climates, and I'm pushing school leaders to say, what are you doing for Black students? How are you investing in Black students, in the Black community? Or it could be, what are you doing for Black faculty, right? And then oftentimes folks will say, oh, well, they have the Black Faculty Association. Oh, they have the Black Student Union, oh, they have this association. I'm like, okay, but how are you investing in it? You're pushing it off. You're saying, oh, yeah. They got it themselves. Black students ain't come to campus to, just support each other. They can't, like that. Obviously, that's part of it because we're thinking about, you think about Dawson's work on linked fate, right? That's what Black people have had to do, right? I can succeed because of, other success, right? So there is that kind of like responsibility, but that's not the main reason why I came here. So I think that's a Black Cultural Center is one way to show, hey, we are investing in Black student life here. If you can't name like a budgetary byline that is explicitly for Black students, you're not investing in Black students. And that's just how I think about it. I took finance and higher education. I don't remember anything about that class, but I remember one thing that my teacher said. She said, you can tell an organization's values by their budgets, So if an organization isn't doesn't have like, space in their budget for Black student life, you can't tell me that you care about Black student life, right? And that's, otherwise it's a lot of window dressing. But yeah.
That's powerful. From Vincent Jenkins asks, do you have any insight on what students can do to repivot the focus on Black joy? The pivot to Black joy seems as if it would be beneficial for those looking in, but what of those students who are in the position of trying to look at life from a more joyous perspective?
So I'm gonna try to engage with that, right? So I think my recommendations are just be like, okay, let's all right, and this is the thing that I want to, why I really wanted to ground what I was doing in research and literature, right? I didn't want this to be some superfluous, fluffy endeavor, right? I didn't want it to be like, oh, Black students should be happy too, right? Like they should, but it's deeper than that, right? Like it's not just that; it's so much more. Like so I guess what I would say in response to that, like Black students looking for, trying to seek a more joyous experience, is like, just asking straight up, like where do Black people come together, right? Where are the spaces of Black congregation, right? There could be a virtual space. It could be, a set of steps, a stoop, right? It could be, the Africana Studies Department, Black Studies Department. It could be the cafeteria on Wednesdays, right? I know back at Brown, we had Chicken Finger Fridays, and it was, it was great, but that was a Black space. It turned into a Black space, right? So I think it's important and valuable for Black students and those trying to support Black students to think about, okay, where are these spaces? How do we identify them? And how can we bring more people in, right? And for administrators, it's important to be like, okay, this is what Black students are doing already. How can we support them? Right. That's it. I always say, like, let's start off with the assumption that Black students are competent, they are agentic, and they're going to, do what they need to do to make it, right? And I think institutions can either facilitate, persistence or joy, recreation, what have you, or they can inhibit it. So by looking at what Black students are doing on the ground, coming together, where are they partying, that type of thing, they can see how they're either getting getting in the way of it, or opportunities for them to support it, right? One thing I think about is policing parties, in my, piece on Black joy, they often, a lot of the participants were like, a lot of these white fraternities can do whatever, and just do whatever. But as soon as any, Black people come together, it's, oh, call the cops, and that's one way for Black students to just be just a little more demoralized. And I think these things add up. So I hope that engages somewhat with the question.
Yes, thank you so much. So Courtney asked this question: interiority and quiet also really inform my work. I'm really into the Kwashi, I hope I'm saying that right, is asking us to consider here. Can you talk a bit more about how you operationalize that, how you look for it in your data collection analysis, and how you speak to, write about, and what cannot be said, document, and shared? What you choose to keep interior as a researcher, or to protect the beautiful interiority of Black life? I know that's a multi-question there.
That's a great question. That's a great question. I think Bettina Love and another author have a piece that kind of talks about tries to operationalize quiet. There's another piece, I believe their last name is Randolph, but it's in Sociology of Race and Ethnicity, that they also try to apply and operationalize quiet in social race and ethnicity. And they're talking about music lyrics, right, and rap lyrics. And I think, to an extent, quiet can never be, it cannot, to your point, quiet cannot, it can never be fully articulated, right? It's something that I think is just, always will be a little bit out of the grasp, right? Trying to hold on to a puff of smoke or something, right? But I think quiet engages with that gray area, heard in whispers and songs, in between stanzas. Yeah. I don't know, but it's, I think a useful way of thinking about and writing about quiet is like, what do you think is unsaid, right? And just extrapolating from that. So again, like I said, like there was, she told me about the painting, and a lot of that was just like, oh wow, like it's I couldn't identify it, right? I didn't dig too deep into that, but there's something about her interior where I did was like, you know what, maybe it could be this. So I think there is that kind of just questioning that comes with it and leaving that space open for it, knowing that as a researcher, knowing that I can never fully articulate or encapsulate who Ashley is and and about her work. It's kind of like that appreciation for that gray area and try to fill in the blanks, but also leaving it up for question, because that's humanity, that's life, right? And we can do but so much in social science research, and I think quiet kind of compels us to leave some of these things with questions, and I think the work of Sadia Hartman and Wayward is very useful in making us think about what counts as research, right? In Sadia Hartman's work, she takes like kind of snippets from archival research, from newspapers, etc., and she creates stories about these Black women, who are otherwise like, just there was not much archival evidence about, but she creates stories based on what she knows and what she knows about that time period, other research, but for lack of better words, she's just coming up with, okay, let me give her a story for this, and I think that's research. So I think quiet compels us to ask what is research as well, and being comfortable with the not knowing and making conjectures. So I hope in some way I have engaged with that, Courtney. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. I know we're running up to time and just hit time, but I asked this the last time. We don't hear too much about Black joy, so I'm gonna ask for as a personal privilege, as the person that's engaging the Q&A, if we can give just a few more moments to answer some questions. It seems like there's a lot of engagement with this presentation. Are the directors cool with that? All right, thank you so much. I see the
I do have to leave. I have the rehearsal I have to get to. Antar, thank you so much. And man, everybody, I wish I didn't. Well, I do. I love it. I love the gig, but I got to go.
Thank you. Appreciate
it.
Thanks, everybody.
So I just want to say how incredible this was. I've always tried, this is Wilda. I've always tried to put into words the complexity of not feeling colored and the dehumanizing effect that racial social studies and discussions can be. I am a normal woman like other women. It's difficult to feel like I exist outside of the skin I wear. That question of do Black Lives Matter outside of protesting brutality and the legacy of slavery? It's important because we are still here existing, painting, swimming, crying, reading, looking up at the sky and dreaming. So that was just a statement, but I think it was a powerful statement about a person really just expressing their own identity and their feelings of joy.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that, and I think to that extent, I'll be brief. But like one of the reasons why I did this research, because I saw the important work that was happening, but I also didn't see a lot of the other stuff. Probably the majority of my experience as a Black student, right? Microaggressions, racism, totally, shaped a lot of my experience. But my experience was so much more, and I think we could all, administrators, scholars, other people would do better by appreciating that complexity and the competency, and totality and ordinariness of Black people as well.
Thank you. So Megan asked this question: what are some ways in which we can include these principles in educational curriculum?
That's a great question. I mean, and again, I think it's more like a case by case thing for sure. But again, it's a question you ask yourself, right? When I'm doing this, it's like, okay, what's my starting point for this group, right? What's my starting point? Am I beginning in creating this curriculum or in creating this policy or creating, or what have you? What am I assuming that my students know, right? What type of scaffolding do I think I need to give them? And I think it's this. I think it's like, yeah, partially that, right? Like where do I think my students are right now? Am I assuming, like that they're, from a place of deficit, from a place of like, just, I know they're dealing with so much, right? I know they're dealing with so much. So because of that, how is that shaping my work? How is that shaping my practice? Or am I looking at my students as holistic, complex beings who, yes, they may have a lot going on in their life. Yes, they are dealing with structural racism and oppression, but yes, they might just also enjoy playing basketball, right? Maybe they also enjoy, the illustrations in Goodnight Moon, right? Like the totality of their lives is not that racism. So how are we appreciating that complexity, right? Or the assumptions that we make, right? Like, oh, they'll want to read this book about, this person because I'm sure it's a lot like their lives, right? Some Black students just like, look, yeah, this is it. I want to read this. Like, I want to read Roots, but I also want to read, like, something about like Star Wars as well. So appreciating that complexity, and multiplicity of Blackness.
Yeah. In our Africana Studies program faculty, in our recent meeting, that theme was of something that we've talking about. So you're right on target with that. What can non-Black faculty, staff, and administrators do to ensure that PWIs are environments where Black students can experience this Black joy?
Oh, for sure. I mean, no, one, you use your voice, right? Like, I think, and I don't want to speak for you, Dr. Friedman, but I'm sure oftentimes it's you who have to advocate for things, right? And I think it just gets tiring to be that Black person all the time, right? So I think one, using your voice, not asking like, hey, I think, can you say something about this Black faculty? Let me give you a little bit more work. But it said, yeah, you use your voice. You complain to the dean. You complain to the provost, right? So I think that's it. Like, look, like this Black faculty member here is working with all the Black students. They're on 15 dissertation committees, and they're a junior scholar. This is not right. And I'm thinking, I'm not just, it got a little personal, but either way, hey, you use your voice. Don't tell that, Black faculty member or Black staff or overworked Black admin that they're doing a great job and they're here to support you. No, you complain to the dean. You make things uncomfortable. So I think that's a good way of doing that work. Partially. So.
Yeah, and this will be my last question, just to kind of wrap this up. What is your next line of research? And have you considered expanding into looking at Black joy as it applies to faculty, as it applies to administrators, as it applies to other individuals on campus?
I think that's a great question. I mean, I'm still trying. I mean, I think it's a great line to think about. I'm not sure if I'm still going to, to what extent I'm still going to be thinking with joy. I think I'm thinking with joy, but like if I'm going to apply it to faculty, but I think it's also so important I think it is applicable to faculty, admin. Like, it's important, right? Who wants to work in a dreary, boring, sad place of despair, right? We need to be asking these fundamental questions. I think it's a worthy line of research, but I'm curious. I'm thinking I might ask folks, both within and outside the academy, what does joy look like to you, right? Black folks in particular, and just kind of, just archiving that for myself and maybe another book project. So I'm curious about, just beyond the walls of school, right? What does Black joy look like? How do Black people themselves understand joy and make meaning of it, especially in this time, right? Especially in this time of extreme disparities, materially, wealth wise, like how are you making it, right? Like, what gives you joy? And I think we can stand to learn a lot from Black people across the board. So I'm thinking, more sociological type piece, maybe less education, but yeah, I think it is applicable, and that's why I wanted to kind of just take it and make it a little bit more broad, right? So that's how I'm thinking. I appreciate the question.
Yes.
So Dr. Tichavakunda, we thank you so much for your presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Johnson.
Thank you.
Oh, I just want to echo Sydney. This has been fabulous, just fascinating and so important, beautifully presented. So happy that you were willing to be part of our series. I hope this is not the last time we interact with you.
For sure. Thank you so much. Yeah.
And thanks to everybody that attended tonight. 2 more weeks and we've got another great talk coming up. So again, thank you, Dr. Tichavakunda. Thanks, everybody, and have a great evening. I don't want to leave.
I was like, how do I end it? But yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Yeah, it was just wonderful. Just great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. You have a good one.
Okay, bye-bye.